o'clock. So welcome everybody to the June action call, even though it is July. We did have to move it because last weekend we had a group leader retreat, which went really well. My name's Gina Oliveri. I'm the Grassroots Engagement Manager at Results International Australia. And I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we're calling from around the country, no matter where we're calling from, we are calling from the land that is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. And we pay our respects to elders past and present and future, and any elders from other communities who might be on our call today. Because we're using Zoom, which might be new to some people, we have got a raise hand button that you can press. If you have a look down the bottom, it'll give you a few different options for things to click on. And so you can raise your hand if you have a question. You can also type it into the chat box if you can't find raise hand. And if all else fails and you just can't figure out what to press, just feel free to unmute yourself and just tell us that you've got a question, because sometimes that's the only way to get attention. And I've also just popped into the chat box the link to go see this month's action sheet. So if anyone hasn't had a look at that just yet, please go and have a look in the chat box now, and you'll be able to download that and have it in front of you. And I believe we do have Dylan on the line now as well, our guest speaker. So welcome, Dylan from Oxfam. And
thank you, Gina.
Yeah, good to have you. And I see we've got Western Sydney on the line as well. So great to have so many of us here today. I'd like to kick off today's call by telling you a little something that we normally start with, an inspiring story. And I guess this story I found both inspiring and startling, which is every month or so I talk to the other grassroots managers from around the world, so from all the different results countries. And talking to my counterpart from Results Mexico, he was telling us on our last call about how in Mexico, tens of thousands of human rights defenders have just keep going missing. There are, he said something like 30,000 or 20,000 people who are just missing. They've just disappeared. And he was telling us that the government spies on and persecutes journalists and human rights defenders. And because Results Mexico is considered an organisation that defends human rights, they have to be quite careful with how they operate, and they worry about the prospect of getting into trouble or having something happen to them. But they carry on working, and we find them incredibly courageous and inspiring that they keep on doing their work defending human rights, the right to basic education for all children, the right to health, and the right to a dignified life free of poverty. So I just wanted to pay tribute to our counterparts in Mexico who carry on despite this threat. And I'd like to hand over to Alyssa now, who's going to tell us a bit about what's been inspiring her lately.
Yeah, okay, so I have a story that's a bit closer to home, and as Gina mentioned, we had our inaugural Results Group Leader Retreat over the weekend. So our group leaders from all over Australia, they came together to learn and share, and also to build some relationships that we think will lead to really effective advocacy and also hopefully long-lasting friendships with one another. But we'll hear more about that and what they got up to later on in the action call today. I would like to talk about how I was personally inspired by Group Leaders Initiative by coming on the weekend. As individuals, they displayed a lot of talent as leaders, and I wanted to especially give a shout out to Roz from Canberra, who's one of our newer group leaders. And her prominent role in Results involves stepping out of her comfort zone on a very regular basis. And I'd also like to give a special mention to Daisy, who came along to the weekend despite only being in Results for a couple of months and only one of our new partners. And she contributed and she shared her experiences, and she was a great addition to the group. And since then, she's also stepped up to group leadership. So I'd like to say congratulations to Daisy and to all the group leaders, and also all you volunteers for being here today on the call. It always inspires me, the initiative that everybody shows in doing this. So thank you, and I'll now hand you back to Gina to talk to our guest speaker.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, I'd like to tell you a bit about the people that we've got on the call today. So first of all, I'll tell you a bit about Dylan, who's our guest speaker, but I'll also tell you about the other people that we've got on the call. So starting with Dylan Quinnell or Quinnell. Now, Dylan, you need to clear this up for me because we didn't really get anywhere with our emails backwards and forwards about the pronunciation of your name. Quinnell?
Quinnell.
Quinnell, thank you. Okay, cool. That's what I thought. Dylan Quinnell is Senior Media Coordinator for Emergencies and Programs at Oxfam Australia. He's based in Melbourne and leads media relating to Oxfam's response to emergencies, humanitarian crises and international program work, specifically those in the Pacific, in Southern Africa and in East and South Asia. Before he joined Oxfam, Dylan worked at Care Australia, which is an aid agency, and he worked at a child and family services organisation called Berry Street and also for World Vision New Zealand. Dylan's worked on responses to some big events that you may have heard of: Cyclone Pam in Vanuatu, Cyclone Winston in Fiji, and the Nepal earthquake and the Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia. He's previously also been based in China and Indonesia, so has a wealth of experience to draw from to talk about today. So welcome, Dylan, and I'd love to tell you a bit about some of the people we've got on the call, some of our wonderful results volunteers. So on the line today we have people like, yeah, they're really cool, trust me. So people like Mike, who's upstairs from me here in Hobart, who led the organising of a fundraiser last night, a 1980s themed dinner dance for 90 people that raised somewhere around the $3,800 mark, which is a really great outcome. So thank you very much, Mike and the Hobart team. I'd like to pay tribute to Lindsay, Alicia, Robert, Roz, David, Tian, Daisy, Albert, Patrick and Bert, who have all joined our study tour and will be meeting parliamentarians in August in 2 intense days of parliamentary meetings. And I'd like to give a shout out to our some of our group leaders and partners, Linley, Ryan, Christine, Daisy, Lindsay, Roz and Robert, who came along to our leadership last weekend and helped contribute to not only some new directions for our campaign, but also had their voices heard on some about how we talk about ourselves and our branding. So these are the kind of people we have on our call today, and I'd like to really thank you all for being here. But I really want to give Dylan lots of chances to speak because he has some really fascinating stuff to talk about, so I'll get straight into it. Dylan, you recently went to South Sudan as part of Oxfam's response to the famine there. Can you give us a sense of what famine looked like in the particular part of South Sudan you were in?
Sure. So just a bit of background. I travelled to South Sudan in early May with Oxfam's Chief Executive, Helen Zoki, who is a remarkable woman. And we went to both the capital, Juba, and then up to a town in the north called Nial. I was saying to Gina that it was really interesting for me because I'm South African born, but grew up in New Zealand and then I've lived in Australia now for about 5 years. And flying into South Sudan had a very stereotypical and very 1980s Band-Aid idea of what famine would look like, if that makes any sense. So I'm thinking sort of skeletal people, children with the distended bellies, and that was kind of what I was expecting. South Sudan is a really unique case. So obviously it's the world's newest country, having got independence in 2011. Unfortunately, shortly after, it fell into what's now been a 3 or 4 year civil war in 2013. And it's actually, in most cases, the war that is causing the famine in South Sudan. It's a country that's relatively green. It's not overly hard to grow crops. It's that people aren't safe enough anywhere, don't feel safe enough anywhere to replant anything. And when their villages are attacked and their crops are destroyed, they move. And when they then try and set up again, they're attacked and the stuff's destroyed again. So they get to the point where they just stop trying. So when we got to this town of Nial up in the north, which is just south of the 2 counties, Leah and Mayendit, that had been declared to be in famine in February, that was what I was kind of expecting. What we got when we saw there was surprisingly people that seemed relatively happy. The town of Nial is surrounded by the world's biggest swamp called the Sud, so it's relatively safe in that enemy armed groups can't move enough heavy weapons through the swamp to actually attack the town. So this means it's full of displaced people from the north, from those 2 famine-hit counties of Leah and Mayendit, who've walked for days, often 7 or 9 days. One of the mothers we spoke to unbelievably gave birth to a healthy baby daughter in the middle of the swamp. But they then fled to Nail, and then obviously this is where they need support. So people were certainly hungry. We saw a lot of the children with the distended bellies. The other thing that was really interesting for me was the staff explained to us that when you see young children, especially with bleached hair, that's a sign of severe malnourishment, which again, if you don't know what you're looking for, you wouldn't necessarily notice it. So that's probably a bit of context as such, but just to say that the majority of these people in this area are actually surviving because of aid. It's very, very difficult to get anything in there. There's obviously no roads going through the swamp. And now that the rainy season's kind of started, it makes it even harder to airdrop in supplies, which is what the World Food Programme had been previously doing. And then agencies like Oxfam would be on the ground to hand out the supplies. The other thing just to make clear is that it was declared, the IPC, which is the classification system used to declare famines, only a week ago said that those two counties of South Sudan are now out of famine. Now, I also said to Gina that although this sounds like really good news, because a big part of that is because of the international aid effort, it doesn't necessarily mean a huge change for people on the ground, because famine is a very severe scientific definition. So already when you have a famine declared, 2 adults per 10,000 people or 4 children are dying every day. So the fact that we're now one step below that certainly doesn't mean it's better, and it means that there are, in this case, a lot more hungry people.
Yeah, I thought that was, it's quite a sobering thought. You sort of think, oh, famine's over, everyone's got full bellies, happy days. But no, it just means that the severity has stepped back a notch, and there's still plenty of work to be done. Dylan, you mentioned that there are a lot of people that you encountered who are really alive because of aid that was able to reach them during this crisis. Could you tell us a little bit about some of those aid programs and what sort of help has been given to people in this famine?
Sure. So I've briefly mentioned a couple of them in that introduction, which, sorry, was a bit long-winded. And one of the main things in a case like this, obviously, is trying to get emergency food aid to people when they desperately need it to essentially keep them alive. In Nael, that was being done by the World Food Programme, who are flying these enormous cargo planes over the top and airdropping supplies out the back. In other areas of the country, so for example in the West, where in the week that we were actually over Easter weekend, a bunch of bigger towns in the West had been attacked, and 100,000 people were basically slowly fleeing towards the Ethiopian border. And again, every time they settled, they'd be attacked again and they'd carry on fleeing. So Oxfam, while we were there, was actually loading up a giant double tray truck full of food and other sort of aid supplies, which was then going to be driven 250 kilometres, which obviously in Australia doesn't sound like an awful lot. Aussies seem happy to drive for hours and call it just a commute. But over there, because the roads are so poor, like you have to understand there's only 200 or 300 kilometres of paved road in the entire country, the whole of South Sudan. So a 250 kilometre drive will take most of a day. But that aid was going to then be driven up, and the food and the sanitation and hand washing type equipment would be handed out. The other thing that Oxfam is known for internationally, and is certainly doing in South Sudan, is water and sanitation work. So for example, in a number of places, we'll be trucking fresh water into groups of displaced people to make sure that they've got safe drinking water. In the town of Nael, what that involved was going in and working with the community to help rehabilitate wells that they'd already built to make sure that they were as good as they could be, giving them a slab to put over the top of them, and then one of those hand pumps that, again, you see in sort of the stereotypical photos you get of aid projects. It's also helping people to build latrine toilets. Now, again, it's something that we take for granted, and it sounds fairly simple, but again, it's remembering that if people don't have proper toilets, as soon as the rainy season starts, you get the waterborne diseases like cholera or diarrhea that start to spread, and they can kill people within days. Finally, in the town of Nael, because as I said, the majority of aid has to be flown in, obviously that's not something that we can keep doing forever because it's extremely expensive. So what it is about, again, working with the community to try and improve what they're already doing to keep themselves alive. So the first part of that was trying to encourage people that they were safe enough to restart gardens and crops again. Then it was giving them seeds, tools and training to help groups of 25 people start a community garden. While they did that, they learned skills which they could then take home and start smaller kitchen gardens so that obviously they could feed themselves and their children more nutritious food that they were growing. And we saw things like sweet potatoes, onions, eggplants, interestingly, in one case. Then the other thing is giving people fishing kits. So obviously there are fish in the swamp, but people had pretty rudimentary lines that meant that they'd have to spend most of the day out there trying to catch anything. With the kits that we've given them now, they can set that up in the morning, go look after the garden or the children for the day, come back and pick up the fish that are there in the evening. And the final thing we saw in Nyel in particular that is particularly interesting is that there's, again, stereotypical ideas of what you do in a humanitarian response or in development. But every context is obviously very different, and there's unique challenges that come with that. So one of the challenges in that particular county is that obviously there's this giant swamp. There's the town of Nyel on some dry land in the middle, and which has got 30,000 odd people living in it. Then there's about 5,000 people living on these tiny islands scattered throughout the swamp. And this is basically where they've ended up while they've been walking through trying to find safety, and they've kind of set up small communities or small villages there. Some have been there for a couple of years after they've fled previous violence. Some have only been there a few months. So Oxfam, with the help of Australian aid, and this is again a really exciting part of this, is that the government has actually put a reasonable amount of money into South Sudan over the last couple of years. We've provided people with canoes and then again a bit of training so that canoe drivers are able to essentially use long poles to punt these canoes through the swamp. This means that people can get from the small islands where they are back to the town of Nyel, where women can access rudimentary maternity care, particularly if they have a complication during pregnancy. People that have started these community or these home gardens can take any leftover produce they have and sell it at the local market and use that money to buy extra supplies. And on some occasions, children are actually able to get to school, which is obviously really important as well.
Yeah, when you told me about the canoe program, I thought, yep, that's probably the last thing I would have thought would be useful in a famine, a canoe. But it makes complete sense that in this context, having a canoe, being able to get around, makes a massive difference. We will hear some questions from our callers in a moment, so please do think of questions you have and feel free to use your raise hand button if you've got them. But Dylan, maybe you can just briefly comment on what role do you think Australia has to play in bringing this famine to an end?
Sure, and again, this is something I discussed with Gina at reasonable length during the week. And it is actually interesting because there's obviously the aid, which is monetary support, which is always so important. The UN appeal for South Sudan, like so many other appeals, is underfunded. However, it is a little bit better than some of them, like, say, Yemen. The Australian government has put, we estimate, about $22 million into the conflict in South Sudan in the last year. In terms of humanitarian aid. Most of it's gone through things like the World Food Programme or the UN or the Red Cross, but both Oxfam and World Vision Australia have grants that we're using in different ways. The government has also put some money into helping countries like Uganda deal with South Sudanese refugees. They already have almost 1.2 million South Sudanese refugees. So the money is always essential, and it's something that we have to keep asking the government for. Oxfam is currently doing a fair share analysis, so trying to work out how much the Australian government, along with other wealthy donor nations, should be putting into each particular crisis. Unfortunately, I don't have that data finalised, but what we think it's going to find is that Australia has given about 75 or 85%, 80% of the amount for South Sudan, but will be quite far behind things like Yemen and Nigeria. The other interesting thing in the case of South Sudan is talking to the Oxfam country director over there, who knows the context really well. She says that the Australian government is actually quite uniquely placed to be involved in the diplomatic effort, because obviously the only thing that's really going to end this famine is peace. As I've said, in the majority of cases, the famine is almost solely caused by conflict. It's that communities are being intentionally denied food, that communities are being repeatedly attacked and forced to flee, and they don't have any food on the way. So obviously what we need an end to the civil war, and then long-term development type programs can carry on, because they did previously happen, but now we have our own staff in protection camps in places. What she said to us is that because the Australian government is seen as non-aligned at this point, it's not on any one side in particular. There's something called the Troika, which is the United States government, the UK, and I think Norway, and they've at this point been trying to help find peace, but they're not particularly well liked by either side because of the difficulties that have happened. then the local, the regional African governments, so Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, are all involved in different ways. And again, it could be argued that they're not doing enough to try and stop peace. So what she said is that because the Australian government doesn't fall into any of these groups, we're uniquely placed to put pressure in places like the United Nations, in places like the African Union, to try and call for peace. And obviously with things like the human rights bid coming up, arguments could be made that maybe that could be kind of encouraged as part of that.
Really interesting stuff, Dylan. And yeah, fascinating to hear that Australia could have a diplomatic role to play, since we are seen as quite neutral, and not having.
And I guess the other thing,
conflicted interests.
To say, sorry, Gina, there is that we do have a large diaspora. There are a lot of South Sudanese people living in Australia. Many of them relatively well-known lawyers, activists, artists, sports stars. So again, that just adds another element to it. Yeah,
definitely. Thank you. Now, we do have about 10 minutes for any questions from our callers. So if you have a question and you're logged into Zoom and you can hit the raise hand button, please do that, because it allows me to easily see who wants to ask a question. If you're having any trouble with that, use the chat button. And I'm just going to make sure I can see you all. And if you're on the phone and have no way of letting me know, please just unmute yourself and barge in, because I don't seem to have anyone with their hand up yet.
Gina, it's David from Canberra.
Hello, David in Canberra. Oh, there's a hand. Yep.
Ask Dylan whether it was, is it all quantity of food or is it quality of food as well?
Are you happy for me to go ahead, Gina?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
That's a good question, David, because again, as I said earlier, you fly in over South Sudan because that's the way you travel around, because the roads are so poor, and it looks relatively green. So you'd kind of assume that there would be something growing that's edible. And there's a couple of issues. One is that because people have been moved so much, there's not a lot of actual agricultural crop left, so not a lot of things that we would traditionally see as food. So what's ended up happening now is people are getting desperate and starting to eat whatever they can find. They've eaten through what would be considered sort of traditional food sources. So the people we were speaking to that had fled and managed to get as far as Niall were, for example, living on things like water lily bulbs or palm fruit. Now, both of those things are, in a sense, edible. Neither have basically any nutritional value, and both can make you pretty sick depending on your nutritional state already, or how ripe or unripe the fruits are. In other places, people are eating grass or leaves. So in a lot of cases, they are trying to find something to eat, but it's not food and generally has no nutrition to it.
Thank you, Canberra. Thanks, David. I see Kath Cloudsdale has her hand up in Launceston, well, close to Launceston, probably the only place people have heard of. Kath, what's your question?
My question follows on nicely from that. I'm wondering if Oxfam is able to use resources that we have in order to empower people to find edible foods that are growing there through education about edible plants that are endemic to the area. Is that an approach that has been used or could be used?
That's another good question. I'd probably have to take that one on notice and ask some of the staff in the office if they've got any idea. Again, speaking just from the experience I had, that wasn't something we were doing. Whether that's because there isn't anything that's edible, or because we just didn't know about it or didn't think about it, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, as I say, people were eating some things like the water lily bulbs or the palm fruits that they had at previous times eaten, but they just weren't very good for them. So that's why it was more about trying to get people to start the community gardens or then the kitchen gardens. In both of those cases, though, and this is what's so important in any humanitarian or development work, it's not about us flying in as outside experts telling people what to do. In exactly the vein of your question, it's about working with local communities to help them improve what they're already doing. So people were already digging wells to get water. They were already trying to build latrine-type toilets. It was about helping to improve the design, helping to give them the materials they needed, and again with the guidance, to improve the quality of everything that was being done.
Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate your answer, and I guess pertaining to that, it's so sad to see when a catastrophe of this scale occurs that generations can lose the knowledge of their Indigenous plants and how to grow them. So yeah, it's wonderful to hear that Oxfam is being sensitive to those issues and trying to hold on to their local knowledge and empower the people as best they can. Thank you.
Great question, Kath. Thank you. We have at least 3 more questions lined up, so can everyone please keep them super brief, and we'll try and get through them. We've got Hobart, and then we'll call on Adelaide. So Hobart, what's your question?
Dylan, I just wondered if you have a feel for the Australian government commitment in terms of, is it a long-term commitment or a short-term commitment, and therefore is Oxfam's own program a limited one, that maybe you had to put a grant application in for, and it only runs the term of that particular program. So do we have a long-term commitment like Australia had, say, with the Solomon Islands, with set goal outcomes which essentially have been achieved there?
Look, another good question. There's 2 answers to sort of each part of the question. So firstly, on the Australian government's involvement, look, some credit definitely has to be given where it's due. The exact figures these days are unfortunately getting harder to come by, but it is estimated that the Australian government has put somewhere in the order of $150 million into South Sudan and Somalia, so those 2 humanitarian crises, in the last 3 years. In the last financial year alone, they've put about $22 million into the humanitarian response. This is not an insignificant amount of money. As Oxfam, we'd probably later this week or early next be arguing that it's not enough. It's not Australia's fair share, but again, certainly it is not an insignificant amount. This also comes after Australia has deprioritised aid to Africa and theoretically prioritised it more to the Pacific and to parts of Asia. The second question in terms of Oxfam, we're obviously lucky that we're one of the world's biggest humanitarian organisations. So we're a federation made up of, I think, getting up towards 20 members now. So money is coming in from lots of different directions. So we get some from the EU, some from the US, some from countries like Australia. We are lucky that we also get generous donations from members of the public. So in terms of money just from the Australian government, we could always use more, but I wouldn't say that it's essentially going from grant to grant, if that makes sense. And this does put us in the lucky position where we can plan in the relatively long term. And by that I mean, say, a year or 2 years ahead. Up until recently, we did have long-term development programs that were running in South Sudan alongside humanitarian response programs. Now, these were obviously in safer areas of the country. Now that the conflict spread, those programs are obviously on hold while our own staff are seeking safety in UN protection camps. So hopefully we'll be able to get back to that. But yeah, money is always something that's unfortunately short supply.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that Adelaide have a question and they've posted it, and possibly it's a little complex for having 1 minute left for questions, but there was a question about what is the Civil War about and how sustainable is the fishing in the area?
So just to the sustainability of the fishing first, I'd have to say honestly that I'm not entirely sure. We were told that there's fish in the swamp and that with the fishing kits people could catch them, but whether it's being overfished or underfished, I've got no idea, I'm sorry. In terms of the Civil War, I have lots of personal opinions, which I'd be happy to talk to some of you about off the record, essentially. In terms of what we can say as Oxfam without taking sides, basically what happened historically is that when the country was given independence, it was decided by the people of South Sudan and by this troika that the best way to ensure peace was to make the president a man who was the leader of the largest tribe, and the vice president, or I think he was called the prime minister, was then the leader of the second largest tribe. What has basically caused this war is a falling out between the two of them. So initially it was the two main tribes which split large chunks of the army apart that were fighting. Now, sadly, the fighting has spread, so a lot more tribes are involved. I did also say to Gina that, like so many conflicts we're facing these days, and then the really complex humanitarian crises they cause in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, it's a lot more complicated than even that, because within the conflict, for example, some tribes have for hundreds of years fought over things like cattle. So there is still a bride price. The price, our translator was telling me, has gone up. He has 4 wives. The first 2 wives he had to pay their fathers 50 cattle. The third wife was 75 cattle, and his 4th wife was 100. So he said it's very, very difficult for young men to get together 100 cattle in order to be able to get married and therefore to have a family. So what ends up happening is they get their friends together. The majority of men in South Sudan are armed. They have a gun at home. They then go out as a group or as a tribe, and they attack a neighbouring tribe and steal their cattle. And that, of course, just starts a cycle of revenge where the cattle are stolen backwards and forwards, and in between, people are killed. And it becomes another source of conflict, essentially.
Thank you, Dylan. It's been so fascinating listening to this, and I'm sure we could go on for hours, but unfortunately we do have to wrap it up. And I hope that everyone has an appreciation for, I guess, the complexity of issues that can lead to famine and some of the innovative ways of trying to tackle it. I would like to hand over to our CEO, Maree Nutt, who will share some reflections and also some thanks. And yeah, thank you so much, Dylan, from me as well. Maree.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Gina. And anyone can feel free to contact me on Twitter. Is probably the easiest place to find me if they have any more questions, and I'll see what I can do.
Yeah, awesome. We'll make sure we tweet and include your Twitter handle. But we'll just hear from Maree, and then feel free to head off after that. So Maree, what would you like to say?
Thanks, Gina. Dylan, thank you so much on behalf of us all this afternoon. I actually had at least 2 questions for you, so I'll be tweeting those to you later on. You know, it's not often we get to hear from people who've been on the ground and seen the impact of this famine or many other of the issues that we work on. So you've really done a fantastic job today to bring the issue alive for us, and that's important for us because then that helps us to write really inspiring letters, and hopefully lots of them. So I just wanted to thank you from everybody. I also got the sense that there may be something being published or out in the public domain in terms of Oxfam reporting on the fair share from Australia to support the famine work. So we'll also keep looking out for that in coming weeks and hopefully add that to some more letters that we write. But on behalf of us all, thanks for giving up some of your time this Sunday afternoon, and we'll all just do the usual, either by visual or by audio, give you a round of applause. So thanks very much. Fantastic.
Thank you very much for having me, Maree, and to all of you, thanks for the work that you do. I also mentioned to Gina that I do see your letters to the editor. They come up in the media monitoring, and I know some of the names. So thank you very much for all the hard work you do. And yeah, please feel free to email or tweet through questions, and I'll see what I can do.
Terrific.
Thanks again.
Terrific. Thanks so much. All right, we'll let you go and get back to the rest of your Sunday.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. So I might just hold the floor for a couple more minutes and just make a couple of announcements. The first one is to remind those of you who weren't mentioned before when Gina was talking at the beginning about the people who have already registered for our annual study tour to Canberra, just that we are still accepting applications. So the Canberra study tour, for those of you who don't know, is the 12th to the 15th of August. So do 2 days of advocacy training on the weekend, followed by 2 days of meeting with parliamentarians and walking up and down the corridors of power in Canberra. So a great a great string to your advocacy bow if you are interested in coming along. The best way to contact Gina is on the email address info@results.org.au for more information, and she'll look forward to hearing from you. For those of you who know that you won't be able to make the Canberra study tour, and I just want to be very clear that the Canberra study tour should be number one priority. For those of you in Sydney particularly, if you are interested in joining me on that Sunday, so that's the 13th of August, I and a couple of other volunteers from Sydney will be doing some fundraising for Results in the City to Surf, and we'd love to have people join that team if possible. We have a big target. We want to raise $10,000 in the City to Surf this year, so it'd be great if we had a few more people join our team, and what for me is a really fun day. So if anyone's interested, again, go back to that info@results.org.au email address. And there are also fun runs coming up in Canberra, in Brisbane, in Adelaide, in Melbourne and Perth. So those are all on our website. So good to be thinking about those as fun ways that you can raise money for Results, and we'd appreciate all of that. So the final thing that I wanted to just speak to you about today is a little bit of sad news. And I wanted to just be the one that was able to share that with you. But to let you know that after 4 years with Results, Gina will actually be leaving us at the end of August. So I know that that will be sad news for everybody if that is the first time that you've heard that. I know it's very sad for us in the Results staff team because I'm sure, like me, you'd appreciate the enormous contribution that Gina has made to the organisation over those 4 years. And Gina, I remember that very first time I met you when you came and participated in our national conference in Narrabeen, and you were checking us out and we were checking you out, and you know it all ended in a fabulous 4 years of working together. Now we'll probably have a bit of time to sort of thank you again over the next few weeks, Gina, but I wanted to just firstly start by thanking you from the bottom of my heart for putting your heart, and using your words, your heart, your head and your hands into the role of Grassroots Engagement Manager. You know, I think everybody can tell the passion and the commitment that Gina brings to making a difference in the world, and that's been hugely inspiring and empowering for everyone that you have supported as individuals and as staff in the organisation. And you know, you've also managed and led some important and positive changes to the way we do things in Results. You know, this action call that we have once a month on a Sunday has really come alive because of the changes that you've put in place just recently with Zoom, but a number of other things. So you've really added to the strength of this organisation in so many ways. So just to let you know again that Gina will be finishing up with us on the 31st of August officially. We are commencing our recruitment process and it's underway. We know that Gina leaves big shoes to fill, but I guess on the exciting side, Gina's now going to be embarking on a slightly delayed honeymoon and some further study, which I think is fantastic and very exciting. So again, I'll probably have the chance to say a few more words another time, but we do wish you all the very best and hope that in the future you'll still hold Results, have a special place in your heart, in your head and in your hands for Results. So thanks very much, Gina. If you'd like to say a few words, I'm sure people would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Yeah, it was a big decision and a difficult one, but ultimately the right one. And I guess what I look forward to for the organisation is having someone with a new set of skills, new energy, and who can be in Sydney working alongside the team, who can take Results, you know, to the next level. I kind of felt like I had achieved everything I could achieve, especially being not in the office. and the next phase needs needs something a bit different. And so yeah, I really hope that we find someone amazing who can do that and take you all, lead you all on the next steps. And I will be heading back to uni to do my master's in clinical psychology, which is not at all what I thought I would do, but there you go. Life does weird things to you, and the idea just kind of lodged itself in my head and didn't go anywhere. So that's what I'm doing. But anyway, it's not goodbye just yet, because I'll be around till the end of August. So for now, I shall keep going on with the call. And actually, I'm wondering if we've got the Melbourne group on the line. Perhaps that's that mobile number I can see. Is the Melbourne group here?
Yeah.
Oh, fabulous.
Can you hear me?
Great. I was hoping it was the mobile number I could see down the bottom. And I'd love to, great. I would love to hear, is that Alicia speaking now?
Yes, it is.
Great, awesome. So Alicia, for anyone on the call who doesn't know Alicia, you probably should, because I seem to have been mentioning her name quite a lot in the last few months, because she's had a mountain of letters to the editor published, and also went and saw her MP last month as well. But we're not talking about that today. We're actually talking about another effort that Alicia will be undertaking. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your run that you're going on?
In October, Melbourne has the Melbourne Marathon, and I decided this year at the beginning of the year, I decided I was going to have a go doing a half marathon, which is 21 Ks, and because I'm volunteering so much with Results, I just automatically thought that I'm going to connect the two together, and I've signed up and I've started fundraising for it, so it will be in October.
Awesome. And
yeah.
Can you, I wanted Alicia to share the email that she sent around to a few of us asking for support with her marathon. Alicia, have you got that in front of you? Are you able to read that out for everybody?
Hold on, sorry, I'm not prepared. Sorry, I'll go to my email, sorry.
That's all good. And I'm actually gonna pull up the link as well. So if anyone on the call is inspired by Alicia's efforts to run a half marathon, which I know I'm pretty impressed by, because I've never run that far in my life, I'll paste the link in the chat so that you can
thank you so much, Gina.
chuck some dollars her way, and thus towards Results. Have you got it in front of you now? Almost.
Sorry.
That's all right. I'm pasting
bear with me.
That's all right. I've just pasted the Everyday Hero link so that everyone can go and sponsor Alicia. And I just want to check the amount.
I don't have it in front of me. I'm having trouble getting to my email. I can tell you a little bit about my story and why.
Yeah, why don't you just tell us a bit about your story and why you decided to do the run, and we can fill in any gaps as we go.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, look, I'm normal size today as an adult, but growing up I was quite obese, and in my 20s I decided to lose a lot of weight, and I lost nearly 50 kilos. And in my 20s, when I got to that milestone, I was also a heavy smoker, and I was smoking 1 to 2 packets a day, and then I quit smoking. And I guess for the last 5 or 6 years, I've really tried to challenge myself and become healthier, I guess, for my family, because it's not fair when you're when you're overweight or you're smoking or you're engaging in activities like that, you don't really associate it as hurting people around you, but it does. So I just thought I'd try and get fitter and healthier, and as it's gone along, it's sort of like I've moved from being a very sort of overweight, unfit person to someone who's now training to do a half marathon. And so I guess that was just the next step in my journey. So I guess that's my personal story about, I guess, why I wanted to do a half marathon. And a lot of people I know find it quite inspiring. I know some people now that have started exercising when they weren't, and eating a bit better, and have lost weight and stuff like that. So it has positive effects on not just yourself, but everyone around you. But that's sort of what led to the half marathon. I just thought I'd start fundraising whilst doing it, because I thought it helps keep me training and motivated. Whenever someone gives me a donation or makes it clear to me that they're aware I'm doing it, I feel under slightly more pressure to make sure I'm training, because it's like I owe that to that person because they've given me money. So it just, it helps motivate me to make sure I do it, I guess you could say, instead of just saying I'm going to do it, but to do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Alicia.
That's okay.
Yeah, it definitely worked when I read your story, and it's a beautiful example of the power of storytelling, because Alicia made herself vulnerable. She opened up and shared, about weight loss and about quitting cigarettes and all this effort she was putting in to make her life healthier. And to be able to link that to helping people all over the world be healthier is a really fantastic thing, and definitely a story that resonates. And yeah, I know it inspired me to donate, and I'm sure it will inspire many other people to donate to your effort as well. So thank you so much for fundraising for results. And it's something that we definitely need a lot of, is people going out and doing the fun runs and running the 80s dances and signing up to be monthly donors, because we do need that support to run our organisation. So thanks so much, Alicia. And I think that deserves a round of applause as well. If people want to do a visual or an audio round of applause. Yay! It kind of sounds like a horse clip-clopping along pavement, but it was just kind of nice. Thanks, Alicia. I'd love to now. I'm gonna get Lindley to speak in a moment. So I think Lindley's already quite close to the mic, but if you're not, just make sure you are. On the group leader retreat last weekend, we gave the participating group leaders and partners the opportunity to both learn how to create a campaign and also create one. So it was quite a learning curve, and quite a steep learning curve. And it was quite a big ask of them to say, at the same time as you're learning what exactly a campaign is and how you come up with one, we also want you to create one. But they did a really great job in coming up with some really great ideas that will form the campaign for the next 6 months. And there's definitely still some work for us to do. Even since last weekend, we've had a few ideas added in, and sort of had to think about how it all works. And I guess we're at the stage now where we'd love to hear the feedback of everybody and start to get some more ideas, so that we can really refine it and polish it and make it beautiful. So Lindley, I wonder if you would like to just talk about what the group leaders came up with as kind of some of the main themes of the campaign, and I suppose the why the campaign exists. And while you do that, I'm actually going to share. I'm just going to share the little picture of the timeline we came up with. So.
Okay, thanks, Gina. So I do just want to reiterate that this isn't my plan. This is definitely something that's made by the group leadership team that came along to Sydney last weekend, which was a great event, and I'd recommend it to anybody who's got the chance to head along to that. It's really inspiring. But we decided that the main theme that we wanted to look at was famine at the moment, because obviously it is just a huge thing that isn't really making the media here, and therefore if it's not making the media, it's possibly not in the politicians' minds either, and that's the space that we work in. So we thought about, the low awareness of aid that seems to be around, and the impact of Australian aid in particular. And the fact that Australia is probably not giving enough at the moment. And so the main theme that we came up with is around famine, and we decided, given I guess we have a good culture of food in Australia, we'd go for a topic, foodies against famine. And so then from there we looked at a campaign around that. And you can see down the bottom of your screen there's a tiny little pyramid full of lots of little triangles, and inside that we call them nested goals to reach to the bigger goal. So what we've got at the end of the year is the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook. I'm just looking to my political expert in the room. We would really like the government to not make any further cuts to Australian aid, and in fact an increase would be wonderful. So that's our larger goal for this campaign. And then we thought about ways that in our different states and territories we can work towards some kind of activity before that shows that there is both public and political will to tackle famine in particular at the moment. So we were asked to look at this diagram you can see on the screen with lots of little steps. So I'm looking at kick-off events to start ourselves off and get ourselves warmed up. So people thought about community dinners, and that could be either out at a restaurant or a potluck kind of thing, just to get people together, and also to start talking about this and spreading awareness about the famines that are going on at the moment. And then the study tour obviously has a few specific asks around the famine, which have already been discussed today. And so then stepping through, we get to Anti-Poverty Week in October, yeah, there's obviously plenty we can do in that week. It's a great week to be writing to letters to the editor and having events. And if we were to follow the Foodies Against Famine theme, we would love to get some famous chefs or whoever, personalities around food from our different states and territories on board to potentially attend those. And some states are also thinking about a speakers event, so whether someone from Oxfam came and spoke or something like that. And over this whole time, we were hoping to gather evidence that there is public and political will to fight the famine, so that we can deliver this on a national day of action just before the Maifo, so maybe in November.
Cool. Thanks for that, Lindley. I just need to, pause the screen sharing for just a moment so I can go back to where I was. Hang on. I'm still learning the technology, everybody. I'll just stop sharing there. There we are. So I think you've actually already answered my other questions, which was around some of the key events or moments. So recognising that we've got the study tour next month in August, middle of August. We've got Anti-Poverty Week. We've got that Maifo time. These are some of the moments where there can be specific action and I guess more attention on these issues. And my other question was going to be around the tactics. So yeah, we talked about Foodies Against Famine being a tactic, potentially a national day of action. And yeah, I guess where we still haven't exactly got the details really ironed out is, what are we going to do what exactly demonstrates public support that is demonstrable to our parliamentarians, and what is something that demonstrates political support? So, some of the ideas we talked about were, the sign-on letters or the pledges or the, all the speeches and those sorts of things. And what is it that actually demonstrates political support that is important? So definitely still some gaps for us to fill. And I'd love to just hear over the next few minutes just any feedback or ideas people have, if what you've heard has triggered some sort of idea and you want to share it with everybody.
It's Alicia in Melbourne.
Hello.
Hey. I was going to say I really like the idea of us focusing on Anti-Poverty Week, because I think it's a lot of organisations hold events then, and I know with other things I've been involved in, it's like a good time to get people to show up to things and stuff like that. I just think that like to me stands out as a really good time. Because Melbourne's such a small group, I think that would be great for us to do something during that week. Like, I just think that, and I like the Foodies versus Famine idea. I think that sounds really cool. I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Anti-Poverty Week is quite big because it's poverty generally. So it's a time when there's a lot of focus on poverty in Australia, and there's different reports released and different events going on, and it is a moment where there is focus on the issue of poverty. So it kind of makes sense to piggyback onto that. And I just want to point out something as well that we talked about at the group leader retreat, was that Foodies Against Famine would look quite different in each different group context. Because obviously, if you've got 3 people in your group, you're probably going to do something quite different to if you've got 10 people in your group. If you've got a friend who runs a restaurant, you're probably going to run a different event to if you don't have a friend who has a restaurant. So for some people, it's going to look like, like Lindley said, a potluck dinner where everyone brings a plate and you just share food and you talk in someone's living room. For some groups, it might be that they're really well placed to run a bigger, more public event. For another group, it might be a community barbecue or a cake sale or any number of things. So it's not at the moment, we're not conceiving of it being any one set thing, but kind of just having this theme of, foodies. I like the way you said foodies versus famine, by the way. We were talking about against, yeah, I like it. Anyone else got ideas or any thoughts that jump into your head? But also, don't be afraid to be devil's advocate and tell us, like, what bits do you see not working and what doesn't make sense to you?
Gina, it's Mike in Hobart.
Hey, Mike.
Just while you were mentioning this idea, the thought crossed my mind that in many states our groups aren't very big number-wise, that it's an opportunity possibly to partner with other organisations that would be of a similar platform as ourselves. But I also thought last night when we held our dinner dance, we used the International Students Restaurant at UTAS as our catering facility. And a couple of the resident students, I think maybe from China, said to us, can we join you? And so I thought maybe if there's a venue like that in states where you could just promote the fact that we were going to have a dinner, and usually their catering organisations do it at a low cost for the students, so it might be, let's say, $15 for a meal. But if we promoted it on site and invited those students to participate in this campaign against famine, and so we're sharing a meal together, such as a potluck meal, and at the same time we've got a platform to talk about famine and just let that thought go away with them, that they can in turn multiply out through any actions that they might take, and we could link some publicity associated with the event and the outcome of the event. Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about at the leadership retreat how good tactics, develop your people and help people develop new skills. They bring people into your organisation and help you to build your group. And they progress your campaign. So good tactics achieve all those things. If you progress your campaign but you lose all your group because everyone's so burnt out and tired, then that's no good. So if you're running like you say, if you're running a dinner at a residential college and you're able to use it as a recruitment exercise, with some of the residents, then that's a real, that ticks the boxes. So yeah, thank you for some of those practical ideas, Mike. We might have to leave it there. I see that Marie has suggested Foodies Fighting Famine or Triple F, which is kind of cute. All I think when I see it though is, which kind of sounds like a balloon, running out of air, which might not be what we're going for. But look, we're not wedded to any particular name or ideas just yet. Please do feel free, and I encourage everybody, please, to send any feedback that you have, any ideas to info@results.org.au, because strategizing is an ongoing process. Things change. We've heard from Dylan that quite soon Oxfam are going to release their report about what gaps exist and what role Australia has in fighting the famine. So there's probably going to be, a sort of dollar amount ask that just doesn't exist right now. You never know when an election might get called. You never know when, all these different things happen that you need to be able to respond to. But if we have a few key campaign moments locked down and some key things that we're going to do, that gives us some really good structure to base our actions on. And then, the particular ask and exactly how it all goes down can change a bit over time. So thank you all so much, and please do send through feedback, info@results.org.au, because I would love to hear about it. So thank you everyone for joining today's call. Today's action, as you'll see on your action sheet, is to write letters to the editor about the famine, particularly highlighting the fact that it's happening, because that doesn't seem to be cutting through and making a whole lot of news. And also the fact that Australia has a role to play, and the fact that we've cut our aid program, does, limit our ability to respond to these sorts of crises in the long term. Please do get in touch if you need any support. That email address again, info@results.org.au, and also let us know about your successes. We really, really need to know if you get a letter published, or if you get a meeting with your MP, or if you get an interview on the local radio. So please let us know. And don't forget to tell us what actions you're taking by reporting them at results.org.au/report. Just let us know what you're up to. It helps us to see what people are doing, helps us know what to look out for, and spot opportunities as well. Our next action call will take place on Sunday, the 30th of July at 3:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Because today is technically the June call, our July one will be on the 30th of July. And as always, a recording of this call will be made available shortly and sent out to you by email so that you can review it or share it with other people who haven't gotten to be on the call. And because this week has been the 20th anniversary of Harry Potter, I thought I'd leave you with the words of Albus Dumbledore, as written by J.K. Rowling, who said, "It is important to fight and fight again, and keep fighting, for only then can evil be kept at bay, though never quite eradicated." So keep fighting, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and goodbye.